basic because I will not be able to get to every aspect of grants today during the training, or perhaps even specific, I can't talk either, specifics for your food bank, but I will provide you with an overview of the setup needed for grants, as well as some steps for funding a grant based on specific amounts to be distributed to specified agencies, since that's a very common usage. The purpose for grants, basically they may be used to cover purchased food expenses or to alleviate charges incurred by an agency for shared maintenance fees or other fees associated with an agency order. And the usage of grants in Series 2009 requires several things. One is the creation of grant number series. We'll go over that. The creation of grant posting groups, FBC grant sources, master qualifiers for grants, grant cards, grant method steps perhaps, and more. And this document will discuss how, or this training will discuss how to create grants and receiving grant funds and set up the grant qualifiers, and we will also go over using a grant on an agency order. Although using grants on purchase orders is also possible, but that will be covered in some documentation rather than during the training today. So first of all, we want to go over the basic grant setup. And the first step in setting up grants is to define and assign a grant numbering series, which for those people who set up numbering series, it basically requires just going to the number series setup and creating a number series for grants, and then deciding whether you want to make them manual or automatic. So automatic obviously would let the system assign the grant number when you're creating a card, and manual would allow you to assign the grant number when creating a card. Then once you have your number series set up, you will go into the grant setup window. There are a couple different ways to get to grant setup. If you aren't sure how to find it, you can simply type grant setup in the entry here, and actually it's only showing one currently, but I think there are other ways to get there. And under administration, you'll see the grant setup option, and here you assign what the grant number series will be by clicking on the down arrow and then finding the number series that was previously created for grants, and you can name it whatever you want, but your description should at least say grant in it so that you know that it's the correct number series when you go to select it here. So you will select your grant number series, and then based on whether you've defined that as an automatic numbering series or a manual numbering series, we'll then define how you assign numbers when you create the grants. This field here on the right, some of you may have, some of you may not. The Series Object Update 3.01.16 was created to introduce an option to specify how Ceres should first go about determining applicable grants to consider for eligibility on orders. And prior to the release of this object, Ceres calculated grant eligibility only by effective date, which is selected here. In certain scenarios, for some food banks, that led to poor performance when creating agency order lines. They had a lot of grants that could possibly be applied on an order, and so it was taking a long time to run through all the different grants when calculating available quantity and applicability of grants. So they created a new option called agency. In general, you'll most likely use the effective date for find grants by, but if you find that you are coming across some slowness in the time that it takes to calculate grants, you may want to try changing it to agency. And then once you change it to agency, try calculating grants again for the slow order and see if that boosts up the speed. And if it does, then you can leave it on agency. And if not, then effective date is probably your best option. So that is the grant setup window. When you're done filling that in, go ahead and click on OK. Then the next step is to access and set up the grant posting groups. And that is done here also by clicking on grant posting groups. And it brings up the window where you can create new grant posting groups, and the option to create here, or new posting groups is here. And you can you can enter as many grant posting group codes as you need to separate the GL accounts that will be hit by the transactions associated with certain types of grants. There are 3 columns for deciding what GL accounts will be hit. And like I said, you can enter as many grant posting groups as you need to differentiate between the accounts that will be hit during posting. In this database, we set up a restricted grant posting group and an unrestricted grant posting group. And you'll notice that the grants receiving accounts are slightly different on the 2. So you may wonder, what is the grants receiving account? Now, what you enter in the grants receiving account column, I can't specify, because that will be up to your auditors as to how you want to recognize the money when it's entered. But the grants receiving account is the number, the GL account number that you want to post to in the general ledger when you receive in the grant funds. So when you post to the grant that you have funds, do you want this to be a balance sheet account, or do you want it to be an expense account? That will be something that the auditors will help you determine. And then you will, once you know how they want that to be recorded, then you will select the appropriate grant. You may have to actually create new GL accounts to record the funds if necessary. But once you have them created, you can enter or select, using the drop-down to the GL accounts, the appropriate account for your grants receiving. Now, the grants usage account will be the account that is posted to when you use or apply the grant. So if you're doing an agency order and you're posting an agency order where grant funds are used, this is the GL account that will be hit during that transaction. It's also the account that's used when applying or posting to for a purchase order that is using a grant. The grants allocated not paid column, this only ever applies to purchase grants. So this is a holding account for any unpaid purchase invoices where the grant usage is applied. So you can have this be a different account than your grant usage. And again, it only applies to purchase orders. So if you want to show when you've used a grant on a purchase order but you haven't yet posted that order, if you want that to be held in a different account than the grants usage account, then you can specify that account here. It can, however, be the same as your grants usage. Okay, we'll go ahead and click there. The next thing that we need to set up are the FBC grant sources. And I will preface this by saying that you don't necessarily need to use FBC grant sources on grants. However, it can be a tool for setting up multiple or setting up grant sources that have similar qualifiers. And then by just selecting that grant source on a grant, all the qualifiers associated with that grant source will be applied. So if you have many different grants that use the same qualifiers, you can set up the qualifiers under a grant source and then assign the grant source to the grant itself. So we go to the FBC grant sources window, and you'll notice there's a column here for qualifiers. Currently, none of the grant sources have qualifiers applied, but you can set up qualifiers. So here, much like in the previous section, you can set up as many grant source codes as are needed for you to recognize different sources of grant funding. And your code can be unique however you want it to be, unless you're using system-assigned grant source numbering. Recommended that you probably have it manual so you can actually assign a code that makes sense. Then enter your description in the next column. Obviously, to create a new one, you would simply go to New, put in your code and description. And then if you want to use qualifiers or want to assign qualifiers to the grant source, you can click on qualifiers here. Or if you don't have this in your action pane, you can go to Actions and then go to Qualifiers. This brings up the qualifier lines window. And here you can assign multiple qualifier codes or a single qualifier code to a grant source. So if you want to assign a qualifier code to a grant source, you would select it from this list. Now, what you see in this qualifier list, I will explain in just a moment when we're going through the master qualifier setup. So kind of remember this screen here that you see these 6 different qualifiers to choose from on the FBC grant sources. So again, this is where you would set up the grant sources, and if you want to apply qualifiers to a grant source, you would do that here from this window. I will go ahead and close this screen. Oops, we somehow got closed out of the database. That happens sometimes. Bear with me for just a moment, and I will bring open the RTC again. Note that you may find additional information about posting groups and grant sources in the agency groups and qualifiers document. So the document that we're basically covering today is called the Grants Receiving Usage and Reporting Document, but there are additional documents that are available related to grants that you can certainly use. Okay, so now we're going to go on to master qualifiers. Again, if you don't know where to find master qualifiers, you can type here in the search bar and find the setup for master qualifiers. And this is under financial management, setup, and then qualifiers. And this brings up a list of qualifiers. And there are many different types of qualifiers. And I'm going to expand the columns here because even though I opened this earlier and expanded them, it probably changed it when I had to re-enter. You'll notice that there are columns for item, lot, grant, agency, and county. Now, the reason why when we were in the FEC grant source code window, we only saw 6 different qualifiers to choose from is because it will only ever show you those qualifiers that have a check mark in the grant column. So I'm going to filter my list here for grant equals yes. And these are the current master qualifiers that have a check mark in the grant column. So only those qualifiers that have been set up as a grant qualifier will show up when you go to the FEC source code window and go to assign qualifiers. You'll notice that some of these are set up as item grant qualifiers. And I'm going to go over this, and let's basically just start here with grant agency. So here, this one right here has a check mark in the grant column and in the agency column. So when there is a check mark in the grant and the agency column, what that means is that in order for the grant to apply on orders, the qualifier, which in this case is called grant, let me expand that there, grant-agency, has to be defined on both the agency and on the grant. So if you want an agency to be able to get funding from this grant, and this is not limited to specific items, but just to the grant itself and to the agencies, then you would need to apply the code here to both the agency and on the grant. So if there are multiple agencies that can get this grant, then you would need to set up that same qualifier on all of those agencies. And then once that is done, any items that are added to the order will qualify for the grant funds, as long as the agency carries the same qualifier as the grant. Now, there's also a setting on the grant card itself as to whether the funds from the grant will apply to delivery, or to delivery charges, which I'll show you when we go to set up the grant card. And if that's the case, then the funds will apply to both delivery charges and to items. But if you do not check delivery charges, then it will only apply to items on the order. Okay, so that is the grant agency combination. Then we're going to look at the, sorry, I got to get my paperwork in order here. There we go. Then we're going to look at the grant agency county, which, let's see, we don't have any in this selection here that have county checked. But for the grant to apply on an agency order, and this is in Ceres only, both the grant and agency must have the same county qualifier assigned. So they must have the grant or the disqualifier and the county qualifier assigned to the agency and the grant. County qualifiers are not recognized by Agency Express. So if you're using Agency Express, the county qualifier won't be recognized. However, the actual grant and agency qualifier would be recognized on those orders. Another option is item and grant, which is this line right here. If you have a check mark in the item and grant column, then for the grant to apply on an agency order, the qualifier must be on both the item card and on the grant. And it's not limited to any specific agencies because we haven't checked the box for agencies. So all agencies as long as the item has the qualifier, and of course the grant has a qualifier, would receive the grant funding. So if you wanted to limit something just specifically by item and by grant, then you would choose this option. If your qualifier is an item, grant, agency qualifier, such as this one here, then for the grant to apply, the qualifier must be on the item card, the grant, obviously, and the agency card. So as long as the item, as long as the agency is qualified for the item and the item also has that same grant qualifier, then the grant will be applied. So all three places, the item, the grant, and the agency must have the same qualifier. There's also item, grant, agency, and county, and it behaves basically the same way as the grant, agency, county, except for that the item must also have the qualifier. It's a little confusing for those who are brand new to it. Those of you who have been working in it for a while, you probably understand it fairly well. But if you're having troubles getting something to apply as far as a grant on an order, you want to make sure that the correct type of qualifier is assigned and that it's assigned in all the right places. Okay. Now, any qualifier that includes a check mark for grant, which these all do, can be assigned to the FBC grant source. So when we were looking at the FBC grant sources before and we went in to look at the qualifiers or to set up qualifiers, so let's go back there. So we'll go back to the FBC grant sources, and if we want to add qualifiers to any of our particular grant sources, then we would highlight the grant source and click on qualifiers, and then only those qualifiers that are marked as grant will show here. So if I have several different grants that are going to be using the government grant source, and they will all have the same qualifier or qualifiers, then I can simply set up that qualifier on the grant source, and then when I select the grant source on the grant, it will automatically apply the qualifier for me. So I'm going to go ahead and select on this government one the item, grant, agency qualifier. And then I'll go ahead and choose update. And then all grants that currently have the FBC grant source of Gov will be updated with this qualifier. And if you're creating a new grant and you use or select the FBC grant source of Gov, it will also apply this qualifier. Okay, and then it hasn't refreshed this screen, so I hit F5, and now you can see that the qualifiers show as yes. And then if I want to see what the qualifiers are, I can simply click on drill down. So I hit right click and then drill down, and it shows me what qualifier is assigned to this grant source. Okay, so that is the setup, and I'm almost afraid to hit escape because it doesn't seem to want to let me do that. So we're going to use not escape, but we're just going to type. I think it's probably because I typed in up in the search bar to get to it. So the next thing that we want to do is set up a grant card and review a existing grant card. So to set up the grants, you can go financial management and then cash management and then grants, or you can type it up here in the search bar. And I'm going to go to financial management and cash management, and then here under lists is grants. And you'll see that there's already a bunch of grants in here. In fact, the one that I've been working with in the database is this 9034 grant, which we'll go in and take a look at first before we go to create a brand new one. We'll go through everything. And the grant's already been created, so I don't have to specify a number. If I click on this Assist Edit button here, also known as the ellipses, it takes me to the number series, and you'll notice that it's set up as manual, so that means that I get to decide what the actual number is of my grant rather than having the system assign it. Make sure you don't right-click on it and delete this, because if you do, you delete the actual grant number series, not just the grant that you're on. So the description is listed here. Here is where you assign the FBC grant source code. So if I wanted to assign the government grant source code, I would pick it here, And then if I went to qualifiers, you would see that it had assigned that item grant agency qualifier. However, I don't want to use that one because I already have a qualifier on here of grant agency. So I'm going to close this, and I'm going to remove the FEC grant source. Now, I don't know if that will automatically update my qualifiers. It does when you insert it, but I don't know if removing it does. So I'm going to go back to qualifiers, and fortunately it does. So as you can see, now that I've removed that FEC grant source code, it took away the qualifier of item grant agency. Now, you may not have a lot of information about your grantor, but whatever information you do have, go ahead and fill in on the General tab. I'm going to go ahead and make that bigger. So you can fill in their address information, phone number, etc., if you have the information. On the Communication FAST tab, if you've populated phone number here in General FAST tab, that will populate down in the Communication FAST tab. If you have a home page or email address, you'll fill that out here in the Communication FAST tab. You'll notice that up here in the General FAST tab, the calculations button or window has yes listed, but it's not like an area where you can type something in. It automatically updates if you've created calculation methods for the grant. It will default to no when you create the grant card, and then once you've actually added calculation methods, then it updates. If you do brackets for the grant, then this will also update and say yes. I'll go over calculation methods today. Probably won't have time to go over brackets, but we'll go over calculation methods. In the effective date window, here's where you select the effective date for your grant. And let's go ahead and get the right page there. Okay, so the effective date of the grant is going to be the date that you want the grant to actually be available for use. And one thing that you want to note is that any cash receipts that are entered to the grant with a posting date after the effective date of the grant will not show as the original amount when you're looking at reports for the grant. So if you run a report and you look at the column that says original grant amount, if the posting date of your cash receipt was on or before the effective date of the grant, then those cash receipts will show in the original amount column. If they were posted with a date after the effective date, then they will show in the column that shows that you have grant funds available, but not in the original amount. So if we drill down on the effective date, we have an option here to select our date for starting this grant availability to agencies. Now, not only are the effective date included in that, but also whether or not the grant is released. So if the grant isn't released, the effective date really doesn't make any difference because it won't be applied on orders if the grant does not have a check mark in the released flag field. And in order to actually receive funds to the grant, you have to release the grant. Now, you may be doing this ahead of time. You may be setting it up and putting the grant funds on there. In order to do that, you have to release it. So what you probably want to do is if you're doing that ahead of time, you want to make sure that you don't have anybody entering agency orders, or if it's going to be a purchase grant, you don't have anybody doing purchases that the grant might be taken on, because then you'll have to go back and try and fix those later. So I would recommend if you're setting up a new grant, you're going to be posting receipts to the grant, that you want to make sure that people aren't doing orders if this grant's going to apply to either agency or purchase orders that they might be working on. Then the expiration date field, if there's going to be an expiration date for the grant, then you would enter that here. If there's no expiration date, it just goes until the money runs out, then you can leave the expiration date field blank. The grant balance field, if you drill up on that, it will show you all the entries that make up the grant balance. And so you'll see here that the posting date, where's our posting date column? Over here. The posting date of all these entries is after the effective date on the grant. So that means that if I were to run a report on this particular grant, it's not going to show me any dollar amounts in the original grant amount column because these were all posted after that effective date. If I go back and I change the effective date to 11/1/2012, then it would actually show me some of the entries as being in the original amount. So I can either just type it in, or I can use the calendar to look it up. So when we go run some reports, you'll see that the ones that were on 11/1/12 should show up in my original amount column. So the grant balance, like I said, you can see all the entries that make up the grant balance by clicking on this field here. And in order to enter funds against the grant, as well as to have the grant apply to orders, it must be released. So you probably, when you're doing a setup on a new grant, leave this unchecked until you're ready to receive funds against it. So obviously it's going to be unchecked when you first create the card, and then when you're ready to receive in cash, you'll have to check that box. The priority field, if there is more than one grant that could apply on an order, then you would want to set up grant priority. So if you want a specific grant to apply first, and they all have the same qualifiers, then you would set up grant priority to handle which grant gets used first. Priority of 0 is the highest. Then it would go to priority 1, then 2, etc. Now, if you have grants that have completely different qualifiers, but they could apply to the same agency, then you may not need to use priority. It's only if they have the same qualifiers, or you definitely need to specify which grant is going to apply first, then you would set priority. So again, 0 is going to be the highest priority, and then 1, and so on. The apply to field, your options are agencies, purchases, and agencies/purchases. It is possible to have a grant apply to both agencies and purchases, but note that if you're going to be entering funds that are specified to a specific agency, then you cannot use this option. It only works if you're applied to as agencies. So if you're receiving in, let's say you get $10,000 for a grant, but those monies are designated to specific agencies, then you cannot use this option here. You must use the agencies option. You'll see that the next field here is apply to delivery charges. So by default, I believe this is unchecked. If you want the grant funds to apply to delivery charges, which are usually to a GL account that is specified in your agencies and receivables setup window, then you would select the applies to delivery charges field. And then when the order is created, as long as the agency has the appropriate qualifiers for the grant, and it's not an item grant agency qualified grant, then it will apply to delivery charges. So if you specified, item qualifiers, actually, you know what, I haven't actually tested that out. It could be that it works as well for those that are item grant agency qualified if you have this checkbox done, but I haven't tested that specific scenario out, so you would need to confirm that. On the posting FAST tab, if you want to specify default dimensions, this is going to be, of course, what shows here are going to be based on your global dimensions. So minor global dimensions are department code and project code, which are also known as shortcut dimension 1 and shortcut dimension 2. So these might be slightly different in your database as to what it says right here. But if you want to apply default dimensions when the grant is used, then you would set those here. So if I wanted this to always be department 1000 and a specific project, then I could select that here. Otherwise, it won't default on the postings for the grant. The branch code, if you're using branches or responsibility centers, you can define that here. We don't have any, so there's nothing to select from. Fund number, if you want to apply a specific fund, you can select that here again as a default. And then the grant posting group, this must be defined in order for you to post anything to the grant, because this determines what GL accounts are hit when we do the posting. So if you remember earlier, we set up the grant posting groups and defined the grant receiving, grant usage, and grants allocated not paid accounts. So this tells the system which one you want to use for this particular grant. And again, you may have more than what are showing here based on the different GL accounts that you need to post to. So I've selected this unrestricted, which if I, or restricted by Lucky that I did that. But if I want to see the accounts, then I can click on the advanced, and it shows me, okay, I've selected unrestricted, and these are the GL accounts that will be hit for grants receiving and grants usage. The general business posting group, if you're using general business posting groups, then you would select from your drop-down list here what general business posting group will be used when posting to the grants. Some people don't use general business posting group, or they use one just called general. And if you click on advanced, it will take you to the general business posting group list. And then if you want to see what accounts are defined there, then you would go here to the general business posting group list. And as you can see in this database, there's only one general business posting group. It's called general. And then in combination with the general product posting group, which comes from an item card, will determine what GL accounts to hit on the lines. So we selected the general business posting group of general, and that is the basic setup of the fast tabs on the card. Then if you want to then set up calculation methods for determining how the grant is going to apply, then you can either access that by going to your action pane, if you have it on your action pane, which I do for calc method. If you don't, then you can go to actions. Actually, I think that's back. It's under related information, and then calculation and calc method. So if you don't have it on your action pane, you can add it there, or you can get to it by going this way. So go to the calc method, and the first window that you see is the grant calc method effective date window. And here you can set the effective date for your calculation method steps. So it is possible to set up multiple calculation method steps and have different effective dates, and it will then apply the new calculation method steps at the start of the effective date. So if it changes, then the new date will determine when those grant steps take priority. So this one has an effective date of 10/6/2009. Doesn't really matter because this is a test database here, but you would set the appropriate effective date for yours. And then the description, this will just be a description that explains what the calculation methods will do. In this case, we're doing a calculation based on, it says program because this is really old. So we'll change this to agency, can't type. Agency maximum. In other words, basically what we're going to do on this particular grant is we're going to limit it to the grant funds that are specified for specific agencies. And in order to do that, we have to create steps. So we can get the steps from another grant, or we can just set up the steps directly here. We'll go to the steps, and I don't know why it keeps making these things so small. And our general steps for doing the calculation by limit by agency are AMT1 is program remaining amount, and you can click on the drop-down and find your code. So amount 1 is program remaining amount. Again, it's not very big here, but if I wanted to go to advanced, I can see the entire description. So amount 1 is program remaining amount of maximum. And then the next line is amount 1. And amount equals amount 1. I know these descriptions aren't the greatest. The original grant method step codes, I believe, were based off of some payroll calculations. And you know, you can select the grant method step code, but I don't think unless you have access to Designer, you can actually you might be able to change the description. If you edit, yeah, you can just change the description by going into the edit mode if you want to help make it easier for understanding the grant steps. But basically, for a simple calculation where you are going to put, let's say, $10,000 on the grant and then break it out by agencies as to which agency can get what amount, then this will be the method steps that you need to set up. Go ahead and click on OK here at the bottom, and then OK here. And as I mentioned before, since I'd already set up the calculations, it says yes here. But once you set those up, then it will identify on the grant card that you have set up calculation method steps. And additionally, you can set up brackets, but we want to make sure we get through everything here. So we're going to skip that for now, but it is in the documentation. And if you have specific questions for brackets, you know, after you've tried to set it up and you're not getting it to function right, you can always check in with us and we can help out with that. You can get statistics about the grant by clicking on the statistics button in the action pane or by going to related information, grant, and then statistics. And it shows us the original amount. Now this original amount is showing only $1,000 because that's the amount that was actually funded as of the effective date. Our grant balance is $3,800. It shows us our current amount on agency orders. If we want to see what agency order that $6 is on, we can click on the $6 and it shows us that it's on, well, it just shows us the grant number, etc. But we can go to, I take that back. Let's see here. I didn't actually go in here before and check, but we can add it right here. And even the line number. And then it shows us the document number and the well, document type, the document number, and the line number. So it's on line number 20,000. In this case, it's the first line on my order because I deleted the original line. But typically that identifies that it's the second line on the order unless you've removed lines from the order. But it shows us the amount and the outstanding amount on open orders. It also shows us the distributed amount, the sales, the information based on your fiscal year. So this will update when the fiscal year has been moved forward. So again, that's the statistics. If you want to see the grant ledger entries, you can do that either by clicking on this here or by going to the grant balance and drilling up on the grant ledger entries. So either way will get you to the ledger entries. All right, and I got to move through a couple things here. So, and then qualifiers, we already talked about assigning the qualifiers, but basically on this particular grant, it's only effective if the same qualifier code is on the agencies that will be getting the grant monies. So we have set up the qualifier code of grant-agency, so any agencies that are going to be able to get the funds need to have the same qualifier and also need to have grant funds designated specifically to them, which we'll do through a grant journal in just a moment. So right now I have an agency that is set up to have the qualifier for this grant, and that agency is, find it here, not by balance, but by number. So this agency here has the qualifier grant-agency. So as long as there are funds available for this agency, then they will receive dollars from the grant on their orders, regardless of the items on the orders, because we haven't specified it as an item grant agency qualifier. Now, in order to get funds on the grant that are applied to specific agencies, we have to enter a grant journal to do this. Excuse me. Apparently I can't speak all of a sudden. So in order to do that, we're going to go to the grant journal under financial management and then cash management and then grant journal. And you will pick the appropriate batch name. You can use default, or if you want to specify a specific general journal batch for your grant funding, which I've done here, then you can create a new journal for that. So I also created a reason code, so if I ever wanted to track why a journal was posted by reason code, I can do that. And the posting date will populate with today's date. If you want to change it to a different date, then you can enter your posting date as long as it's within your posting date range. The document type for your funding will be payment. Then your document number, if you're using automatic numbering series, then it's going to populate with a document number based on what was in the batch setup. If you were entering manual numbering, then you can put in a document number that's applicable for this particular receipt. The account type on the first line here is going to be bank account, because you have to have the money going into a bank account. So you're going to select the account type of bank account and then the account number of the bank that the money is going to be posted to. In the description field, it will populate with the bank account name. However, if you want to override this with information about what you're actually doing, so we can say funding St. Ignatius, I don't even know if I'm spelling it right, grant. Then the amount will go into the debit amount column. So this is the amount that we're going to be funding to the grant. And then if we're going to be applying this amount to multiple agencies, then we're going to want to put the dollar amount to the specific agency here, not the overall amount for the grant that you, so if you've got $10,000 but you're splitting it up amongst the agencies, then you would put just the amount that's going to a specific agency, because we're going to put that agency here in the grant agency number. So let's say I'm putting $500 to my A. Connie agency. My balancing account type is grant, because I need that to show that I funded the grant itself. So it's going to hit the GL account associated with the bank account, and it's also going to hit the grant. So I select balancing account type of grant and the balancing account number of the grant that I want to affect. And I was close on spelling, but not quite. Now, notice I get this error message, because what did I not do? I didn't go and release the grant in order to receive the funds in. So in order to receive in the funds, I actually have to have that grant released. So I'm going to hit F5 to clear my error. Now, I don't necessarily have to leave here and go, go out to the grant itself and do it. I can do it directly from here. I can drill up and go to Advanced, and I can find, if I can type it in here, 9034. And then I can go to Edit, and I can click Released. I click OK, and then OK again. And then now I don't get that error message. So I didn't have to escape out of the grant journal, go release it, and then come back in. I can simply use the drill up in the balancing account number field to access my grant, edit it, release it, and then I can input that account number. Now, it's important that you have the grant agency number identified here, because this is the agency that the funding is going to be applied to. So here's my A. Connie. And the fund number, because I had identified a default fund number on the grant itself, it populated here. And I thought I identified a department, but perhaps I did not. So any dimensions that you need to have for posting, you want to make sure that those columns are showing and that you fill in the correct information in those if they don't default already. So we have our $500 that's going to hit the GL account associated with this bank, and it's also going to hit Grant 9034, and it's going to fund $500 to A. Connie. So if I have additional lines to enter for different agencies, then I would go to the next line, hit F8 to repeat the process, put in whatever amount's going to be to the next agency, F8 for my balancing account, select the appropriate grant agency number, so I can hit F4, select the agency, and then process through and continue until you've entered all lines that are associated with each agency. Now, it is possible if the funds are not specific to an agency, which would be a different type of grant than the one that we've created, then what you can do is on the first line, you can enter the credit to the grant. So you'll notice here we've entered debit because we're debiting the bank account, we're crediting the grant. So you could enter a line with a credit to the grant, and then on the second line you would do a debit to the bank account. Or you can enter them both on the same line where you're crediting the grant, debiting the bank account, kind of like what we've done here but without the grant agency number. just depends on how you want to enter it. You always want to make sure that when you're ready to post, obviously it's going to error out if you don't have a total balance of 0, but you should have debits and credits that are in balance in order for it to be able to post the grant journal. And also remember that if your posting date is after the effective date of the grant, then these entries will show up on the grant, but they will not show in the original amount column when running reports. Okay, so we're going to enter one more line in here for another agency. And then we're going to go ahead and post. And you can post and print, however you want to do it. So our lines were successfully posted. We're going to go back to our grant now. And we can see that our grant balance has increased. It was $3,800. Now it's $5,800. Notice that the original amount stayed the same at $1,000 because our posting date on those entries was after the effective date of the grant. So we can come in here and we can see that we've just added these lines here, funding, 500, 1,000, and 500, and that the agency number associated with that, ACONI. So we have 2 lines for ACONI because I did a previous one for $2,000, and then A agency and A120413. So those are the entries that we just posted. If we want to see any additional information about it, we can always navigate on the entries and then go look at the GL entries, the bank account ledger entries, and the grant ledger entries. So we want to look at the GL entries. We can see that one side of it hit the GL account associated with the bank, and then the other side hit our grants receiving account. And then the bank account ledger specifically, and the grant ledger entry. So all that information is available from the grant ledger entries and then navigating to the additional information. Okay, so now we've set up the grant, the qualifiers, the calculation method steps. We've funded the grant with dollar amounts. We can run, before we do an actual agency order, we'll go through and look at some of the reports. So we have 3 different reports. There's the grant usage, the grant summary, and the grant status report. They're all available either here under Financial Management Receivables Reports, or the best place, I think, is from Financial Management Cash Management Reports, because then you get a smaller list. Grant usage, grant summary, and grant status available here. The grant usage report, you can select the specific grant that you want to see the usage for. And if you want to filter further, you can select additional filters. You can also add additional filters like by agency if you want. You can enter a date filter, additional options that are shown there. So since this grant was created a long time ago, I'm just going to do a 10109 through today and hit preview. And let's make this a little bit bigger so that we can kind of see this. So it shows our grant number 9034, the description, the effective date on the grant, the expiration date, which there wasn't one, the credit amount of the grant, what's been debited so far, how much is on agency orders in this case, and then the remaining amount on the grant. So that's what the grant usage one shows. Now it doesn't tell us which agencies those orders are for. We would have to look at a different report for that, but it does tell us what the remaining amount is for this grant. So if we want to look at the grant summary report, again, we have our grant number filled in here, our date filter, and if we want to filter for a specific agency, we can put that in here as well. And then we'll go ahead and click preview. And let's make this a little bit bigger. So here we can see all of the agencies that have funding for this particular grant. And you'll notice that none of them have an initial grant amount because the posting date on those entries was after the effective date of the grant. If it was on or before the effective date of the grant, then it would show in this initial grant column. It shows us our total adjustments because we made adjustments to fund these agencies, after the effective date. Otherwise, it's going to show here. It shows us the total grant for each agency. And then before I went in and made changes to this grant, you'll notice that there were some funding to agencies because it wasn't initially set up with the calculation method steps. So those would probably have to be addressed in order to really use this accurately. But because you can see there's use to date, but there was never any funding specifically to those agencies. And then you can see on this one agency that we currently have $6 on agency order and what their available balance is. So they had $2,500 available. They now have $2,494 to calculate. So that's the grant summary report. And then the other grant report is the grant status report. Here you can filter for a specific agency or a group of agencies, or you can leave this blank and get all. And then you can set a date filter if you want. This is going to, if I don't set any other filters, it's not going to give me, actually let's go, yeah, because it's only for the agency. You'll notice there's nothing here to specify by grant. So this is going to give me all information about all grants if I don't specify, and any agencies if I don't specify which agency. So agency A, Connie, could have more than one grant, and if I want to see all that information, then I would specify agency A, Connie, and then the posting date range. And then let's go ahead and make that bigger. And the only grant that this agency is currently specified for is this grant 9034. So it shows us how much they have and how much is available. And if I take off that filter for agency, then any other grants or agencies that have amounts are going to show on our report. And then it's going to show what grant they have dollar amounts on. And that will be the second line of each entry. So that's the grant status report. Okay, so those are the three reports. And then next what we're going to go over is seeing that grant calculate on an agency order. So we will go ahead and go to an agency order. And I've already started an agency order for my agency that is qualified for the St. Ignatius grant. And you can see the line that's already on the order once it comes up here that has a grant allocation amount of $6. And this is the amount that we saw on the reports that we reviewed. And if you drill up on this amount, it shows you, oops, sorry, there we go. If you drill up on the amount, it shows you the line and what grant was used to fund that grant allocation. So if you have multiple grants that are being applied, if you drill up on the dollar amount, it will show you all of the grants that were used to create that grant allocation amount. It could just be one grant as long as the dollar amount on the line does not exceed their funding on a specific grant. Or if it's an open grant where it doesn't matter, if like it's just an item grant and the item's qualified for the grant, then it's just going to apply to all agencies as long as they're qualified for the item. And then you'll see which grant it was that applied, or if multiple grants applied. So to see it calculate, we're going to use the same item here just because I know it works. And notice there's no available quantity because I don't have a location selected. And this happens to be an item that's limited. That's why it only shows me 10 each time because it's limited to 10 typically. So I put in the quantity that I want on the order, and you'll notice that the amount, the fees for that line, then the amount calculated for the quantity times the unit fees, and then the grant allocation amount, of course, populated automatically. If for some reason it doesn't calculate automatically, you can try to calculate it manually by clicking on the action pane, Calculate Grants, or if you don't have it here, you can go to Actions, Functions, and then Calculate Grants. But if you're going to be doing that on a regular basis, then it's probably a good idea to have it in your action pane. A lot of times people don't see the grant allocate, So if that's the case, there are obviously several different reasons why the grant might not allocate. One, it's not released. Always want to check that first. If it is released, are there enough funds available to allocate? If there are enough funds available to allocate, what kind of qualifier is on the grant? Is it an item grant? Is it an item agency grant? Is it an agency grant? Are the qualifiers in all the appropriate places based on the type of master qualifier that was assigned to the grant? Those are all things that you need to look at to see if it's meeting all of those criteria. If one of those things is missing, then it's not going to calculate the grant allocation amount. Seems like there was something else I was going to say. I think that's it. Okay. Does anybody have any questions about the setup that we did or the creation of the grant journal or using on the order? Oh, so of course, a tough question. Katina said, can you explain the negative numbers in the grant status and how that can be removed? Well, as I mentioned before, when that grant was first created, it wasn't applied to specific agencies. So nobody had set up calculation method steps, and so it was set up with entries that didn't apply to specific well, they have an agency number on here, but I don't think it was entered in the same way, because you can see that the source number over here is 9034, and the source type, I think, has to do with grant. So it wasn't entered in the same way as these entries down here, where I used the grant journal with a debit to the bank account, credit to the grant, and then using the grant agency number. So I'm not sure how these were specifically entered. So basically, I would have to go back and find out the original entry for this, and then determine what I need to do to reverse that. And I haven't practiced it, so I don't want to speculate as to exactly what I need to do to fix it. But certainly, I would just go look at the original entry and see what occurred during the original entry. So it looks like there was entries to the grants receiving account and a balancing account to the GL account number of 1000, which is the U.S. bank operating account, so to the bank account. So I would just need to reverse all of those entries, do them in the opposite direction. So I would debit the grant instead of credit the grant, and I would credit the bank account instead of debit the bank account. And then once I'd done all of that, and I would also put the agency number, since they do have the agency number specified here, and that should fix those entries. I can try it if you guys want me to try it. I don't know what the result will be because I haven't played with it yet, but that's basically the idea of what you would need to do it. Okay, great. Any other questions? No other questions? Are you sure? And we do have a document, like I said, the grants receiving usage and reporting document, as well as the agency, where did that one go? It is called the Agency Orders with Grants document. I think there might be a document related to purchases and grants. The purchase grant, we'll just kind of, since we have a little bit of time, we'll just mention that on a purchase grant, it will apply, you can't set up qualifiers for the purchase grant. It will apply if you've selected the grant on a purchase order. So let's go back to our grants real quick here and see if we have any grants that are set up as purchase grants. And let's see here. I don't know if that's a column I can display. Nope, it doesn't look like there is. Let's see. Let's look at this one here. Nope, okay. So what we'll do is we'll just create a quick one here without a whole lot of information. We'll just call this Perch Grant. I guess it didn't like that. Purchase grant, sorry for my bad typing. And we'll select our, we won't put in our effective date yet, but we'll do applies to purchases, and then our grant posting group. We'll make this one restricted, and our general business posting group, and then we will release it. Nope, I got to put in an effective date there. Oops, would help if I have the right one. And we'll put in an effective date of today. And we don't set up qualifiers or calculation method steps, although I think you can set up brackets on purchase grants. I haven't played with that a lot, so I'm not going to embarrass myself by trying to do it right now. But we also need to fund the grant, so we'll go to the grant journal, and we'll do payment and our bank account. And we'll put in $1,500. And go all the way to the bottom here. Obviously no grant agency number for this one. Oops, wrong field. And then whatever other information you need to put in there. And then we'll go ahead and post that. And then on a purchase order, in order for it to apply, we just simply need to select the grant. A little bit slow there. Okay, so you'll see that there's a field here on the header called grant number. And then when you click on the drop-down, you'll notice that it only shows me this one grant, and that's because it's the only grant currently in the system that has an applies to of purchases. So you'd only ever see purchase grants in this drop-down. If it was one that was an agency/purchases, you would also see it here. But remember that if you're using that type, you can't have any limits based on agency. So we select our grant, and then we can come down here and put in our item and select the item that we're purchasing. I don't even know if that's a purchase item, but it tells me, of course, the FBC product source must have a value. That's because I did not clean up or did not populate the appropriate fields up in my header first. So we'll go ahead and do that. Where is our purchase? Let's see what we got here. I guess that's it. So, and we'll do advanced here so we can see that we're picking a purchased item. And I don't know if it's purchase or purchase. Apparently there aren't any. So for purposes of this, we'll just type something in and we'll put in our quantity and our direct unit cost. And we've got a lot of stuff here, but you see that our grant number populates on the line. So when we receive in this product, it's going to go to the grants allocated, not paid account. So if it's a different account than the grants usage account, then that's the account that will be hit during the posting. And then once you invoice the document, it will post to the account in the grants usage line. Hold on, I got a question over here. What will my duties be to make sure the grant funds tie to the agency? So as I mentioned before, you want to make sure that there's a couple different things. If it's an item, grant, agency, qualifier, then the qualifier has to be on the item that is going to be eligible for grant funding. It has to be on the agency that is going to be eligible to get the grant, and it has to be on the grant. If it's a grant agency qualifier, then the qualifier has to be on the agency, and it has to be on the grant. So if we exit out of here, we go back to agencies and receivables, and we go back to agencies. Any agency that is eligible for the grant needs to have the appropriate qualifier. So in this case, I have added the qualifier of grant-agency, and that's the same qualifier that was on the St. Ignatius grant that we used earlier. So it has to be on the agency if it's just a grant agency type. Now remember the different master qualifier types. You have item, grant, agency. So if it's just a grant and agency qualifier, then that qualifier has to be on the grant and it has to be on the agency in order for the agency to be eligible. And then depending on the calculation method steps, if you're using calculation method steps and you have a certain amount funded to an agency, you have to set up those calc method steps, and you have to receive in the funds like I did in the grant journal to specify which agency gets which dollar amount. And that's basically it. But it depends on the type of master qualifier that you have assigned on the grant, and then you have to make sure that that same qualifier is assigned to all of the different areas of the system that master qualifier is linked to. So if it's item grant agency, then it has to be on the item, has to be on the grant, has to be on the agency. If it's just agency and grant, then it has to be in those two places. Okay. All right. Any other questions? All right. Well, I will be sending out the documentation, which is basically what we covered today. I'll send that out to the emails of the people that are registered for the class. And then once the class is up on the website, I'll see if Kim Marie can send out to the people that attended, and, well, not just the ones that attended, but the ones that signed up for it and didn't attend, the link for the recording. Hope everybody got something out of the class today, and have a great rest of the day. Thank you very much.